Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow. Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
The woke propaganda machine is running at full speed, but one man is hitting the brakes and calling out the nonsense: Bill Maher, the liberal comedian, never afraid to take on his own side, just obliterated an MSNBC host who went full throttle on the Trump derangement train. So what exactly did this host say that set Maher off? And how did his brutal clapback leave them completely speechless? I've got all the details right here. Trust me, you don't want to miss this one. But before we dive in, make sure to hit that subscribe button for more videos like this. Let's get into it.
Ken Martin? Yep. I was not aware of who he was before. I did not think it got off to a great start, because I think they need to completely reroute themselves, and I don't think they did it. What do you think?
Let's pause for a moment and focus on the question and how Chris Hayes responds. Maher asked something straightforward. How do the Democrats plan to rebuild after their election losses to Donald Trump? Now, pay close attention to Hayes' answer.
I think there's sort of two different imperatives that are in a little bit of tension with each other. So one, I think there's an imperative right now for the party to stand up against the most destructive things that Musk and Trump are doing. And I think they're doing some genuinely destructive things. I mean, there's people walking around the world right now with like devices inside their bodies from clinical trials sponsored by USAID that they can't get out. The guards that were guarding ISIS prisoners in Syria were paid on USAID salaries that got cut off. There's a 25-year-old mucking around the code base of the Treasury system. So there's things they have to do to try to oppose. But it's also the case that like all of the reflection that happened after losing that election and trying to figure about how do you win back people you lost was real and true. And I guess my feeling is you gotta fight, you gotta try different things, and you have to be authentic. You can't like reverse engineer any of this off a blueprint. And I really think this is true about politics. Steve Jobs once said, it's not the customer's job to know what they want. Like, it's our job. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Barack Obama off of George W. Bush. And you couldn't have reverse engineered Donald Trump off of Barack Obama. What happens in the end of an election is everyone sifts through the data and they come up with their perfect, their plan based on, well, this worked and with this group and we got attack here and there. And what politics about is a certain point is like innovation and communication. You got to come up with new stories.
So according to Hayes, it's not the voters' right to choose who they want. It's decided for them. In the Democrats' world, they believe they alone have the right to dictate what the voters should want. Sound absurd? That's because it is. Now get ready for Bill Maher's epic takedown.
Ken Martin guy, he said something I've heard Democrats say a lot. We didn't get our message out. Maybe I'm paraphrasing, but that's it. And I've said this before to Democrats. No, you did. That's the problem.
Yeah.
You did get your message out, and people don't like the message.
Bill Maher shut Chris Hayes down with one brutal truth bomb. People didn't like the message. That was it. Game over. While Hayes rambled on about reverse engineering political strategies and fighting on multiple fronts, Maher cut straight to the core issue. The answer wasn't buried under layers of political jargon. It was simple. Give people what they actually want. Hayes' overcomplicated explanation only underscored the growing disconnect between the Democratic Party and the average voter. Instead of acknowledging why their messaging failed, he danced around the obvious. But Maher wasn't having it. He made it clear the problem isn't strategy or optics, it's substance. Voters heard the Democrats' message loud and clear. They just didn't like it. That's the hard truth the left keeps dodging. It's not about refining the pitch, it's about changing the product. If your message doesn't resonate, no amount of spin can save you. And until Democrats figure that out, they'll keep losing ground. Think that was bad? Just wait until you hear what Chris Hayes said next.
I think that I don't think there's anyone who hasn't had a moment across the political spectrum of some form of progressive communication that's either left them bewildered or a little like, I don't know about that. But I also think at the same time, there is a message of what I would call like common sense, patriotic pluralism. Yeah. That is a majority message, which is like, if some father and mother have health care for their kid lined up who's trans, just stay the fuck out of their business. Like, and let them make that decision. That's their decision to make. And you don't have to make that for your family.
You've got to love how the left's woke mob constantly muddies the waters. Here, Chris Hayes argues that if parents have gender-affirming care lined up for their children, they should be allowed to proceed, and that it's nobody else's business. But that's not the real argument, nor is it what the left has been pushing, and Bill Maher wastes no time setting the record straight.
The argument is whether the child should make the decision.
But the child is never making the decision. The parents are always making the decision. Parents consent to medical care.
Well, here in California, you're allowed to hide it from the parents if the kid is.
Yes.
Thank you, one person who knows that.
But I mean,
somebody knows that is the case.
What the left was really pushing for wasn't just about parental choice or supporting kids. It was about giving schools the authority to decide whether a child could disclose their transition process to their own parents. Think about that. Parents who are legally and morally responsible for their children could be completely shut out of critical decisions about their child's health and identity, while schools took on the role of gatekeepers. Is it just me, or does it seem like the left is already running from its own message just months after the election? And honestly, who could blame them? If my message was that bizarre, disconnected, and borderline dystopian, I'd be sprinting away from it too. This isn't just about politics. It's about common sense, parental rights, and protecting the family unit. The idea that bureaucrats and school officials know better than a child's own parents is not only absurd, but dangerous. It's an overreach that most Americans simply can't and won't accept. And deep down, the left knows it. That's why they're backpedaling, softening their stance, and pretending it was never their position to begin with. Because when the spotlight hits these radical policies, even they realize just how indefensible and extreme they really are. That's why voters left the Democrats' camp in droves. It wasn't that they lacked a message. It was that their message was bizarre and out of touch with reality. Sadly, legacy media is complicit in pushing these narratives. That's why new media was at the forefront of Trump's re-election efforts. And when Bill Maher laid out this reality to a leftist, her response said it all. Listen to what she had to say.
What do you think of the Trump White House admitting more influencers and podcasters into the press corps? Yeah, the press room is different. I mean, it reflects America.
I think it's great.
Yeah, you do.
But it's mostly right-wing influencers and podcasters, obviously, but I think it's a good step. I mean, this is how people are getting their news.
It is. I mean, how can you deny it?
I was actually over there the other day, and it's packed in there. And I think even all the reporters, whether you're Legacy or the podcasting people, they're all happy. And then they have like the one rotating chair, which I guess is pretty cool. So there's always like somebody new that comes in.
So this is you're at the White House, you're talking about?
Yeah. Yeah.
But it was Axios that they gave the new media seat to, and that is to Mike Allen, who is like an established reporter in Washington. Axios has been around for like 5 years, sold for $500 million. I don't really consider it new media, and I thought it was interesting that that was their first new media.
It is new media, because old media sells for $1.
That is true.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that's what Bezos bought the Washington Post for. He bought it for like $1, didn't he?
Byron Donalds made a sharp and telling observation. Legacy media isn't just a bystander in the Democratic Party's downfall. They're complicit. From twisting narratives to burying major stories, they've essentially sabotaged themselves. And in doing so, they paved the way for independent media to rise and take center stage. But did you catch how a guest tried to downplay Trump's innovative move to invite podcasters and independent journalists to the White House? She dismissed it, arguing that Axios didn't qualify as new media simply because it had been around for 5 years and was bought for $500 million. That was her argument, as if the size of a media company or its price tag somehow determined its independence. Here's the real kicker. Even when confronted with undeniable reality, the woke left refuses to acknowledge it. They fail to grasp that the media landscape has fundamentally changed. It's no longer about massive corporate entities controlling the narrative. It's about authenticity, connection, information and the raw power of independent voices that actually resonate with real Americans. And maybe that's exactly why legacy media feels so threatened. While they cling to outdated definitions and corporate backing, new media is thriving, engaging with the public, covering the stories that actually matter, and shaping the conversations that legacy outlets desperately try to suppress.
Here's where the rubber meets the road, because this is important. He wanted to, this week, he's suing the 12-member commission, the California Coastal Commission. He launches his rockets from Vandenberg Space Force Base. He used to call it Air Force Base, but I guess now we're into Space Force time. He wanted the proposal to expand the number of launches. Okay, again, one of the most impressive companies, an American company. He wants a little more, give it to him. No. The commission, some bureaucrat, said nope, and this is the reason why. Commissioner Carol Hart saying, we're dealing with a company, the head of which has aggressively injected himself into the presidential race and made it clear what his point of view is. Yes, because he lives in America, and he can do that. It has nothing.
There's no overstating how vindictive and bureaucratic the left became when the Democrats were in power. It wasn't just about advancing policies. It was about weaponizing every level of government to enforce their agenda and silence dissent. From using federal agencies to suppress opposing viewpoints to drowning innovation and freedom in endless red tape, their approach wasn't just political, it was personal. They didn't merely disagree with their opponents. They sought to dismantle them, whether it was censoring conservative voices, imposing rigid mandates, or creating obstacle after obstacle for anyone daring to challenge the status quo. The left's strategy was all about control and retribution. This wasn't governance, it was domination disguised as progressive policy. And now, as their grip on power slips, the irony is impossible to ignore. Suddenly, they're the ones crying foul about transparency and fairness. But here's the thing, it's easy to preach about equality when you're the one making the rules and silencing the opposition. Now that the power dynamic is shifting, their silence speaks volumes.
That they're far too willing to stifle freedoms, including speech, for the sake of safety or misinformation, sometimes which is coming from everybody. It's, no one has a monopoly on it. Or just power.
You're saying nobody
it's just
has
power.
A monopoly on it. Come on. That's some moral relativism right there.
I said nobody has a monopoly.
You said nobody has a monopoly on it, but that's like saying nobody has a monopoly on being a billionaire. He's got that monopoly up here. I mean, he's got more money than us. A lot more money than us. So,
I don't get the.
You don't get it?
I don't know what point you're making.
Look, you're saying it's both sides.
Poor Bill Maher. Sometimes you almost have to feel bad for the guy. Sure, he prides himself on being the voice of reason in a world gone mad, but even he can't catch a break, especially when faced with someone like Joe Scarborough week after week. Imagine this. Maher makes a simple, rational observation. Both the left and the right are guilty of spreading misinformation. Even billionaire Mark Cuban, who's no stranger to controversy himself, nodded in agreement, but instead of acknowledging this plain and obvious truth, Scarborough launched into one of his signature long-winded rants, twisting himself into verbal knots, trying to argue that misinformation is somehow a one-sided issue. It was a desperate attempt to make it seem like only conservatives have a monopoly on falsehoods, conveniently ignoring the endless list of fabrications and fear-mongering that have come from the left. And that's the problem. Some people are so married to their narratives that even the most basic facts become unbearable to acknowledge. But Maher wasn't about to let that slide. So in classic Maher fashion, he cut right through the nonsense and hit Scarborough with a brutal truth bomb. His response? Well, let's just say it left Scarborough squirming.
Comparing it to what Elon Musk is spewing out, unfortunately, on X, you sound like Brett Stevens right now, with all due respect. It's a joke. That's a real-time.
And you sound like him, who looks like Rachel Maddow.
Bill Maher didn't just criticize, he obliterated the narrative with precision. This wasn't a mild critique, it was a wake-up call, and one the left desperately needs to hear. If Democrats want any real shot at winning future elections, they need to stop playing it safe with outdated policies and empty slogans. Americans aren't buying the same tired rhetoric anymore. They want real solutions to real problems. Economic instability, cultural shifts, and national priorities are evolving, and if the left refuses to evolve with them, them, they'll continue to bleed support. Voters today are smarter, more informed, and far less tolerant of political games. Maher's message was simple but undeniable: adapt or lose. If Democrats want to stay relevant, they need to rethink their entire approach, craft policies that actually resonate with everyday Americans, and stop dismissing valid concerns as fringe or irrelevant. Because if they don't, they'll keep losing ground to candidates who aren't afraid to speak directly to the people and address the issues that truly matter. And with that, we wrap up today's video. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.